And welcome to Around the Ozarks Spotlight. Each week we uncover the stories behind the people who live and work here in Southwest Missouri. Those individuals with entrepreneurial spirit who work to better the lives of others or put pen to paper to write books about the stories and the history of the Ozarks and its people. I'm your host, Scott Meier. Today we're going to explore the world of putting people at the center of every organization. And with me is Centric CEO Don Harkey. Hello, Don.
Hello, Scott. That's very catchy. That sounds amazing. Where'd you get that?
I think we got it right from your website. How's that?
That sounds pretty good. I like that.
So, as some people can view this and see that you're a young man in an older man's world, that's the only time I'll throw an age thing out there. I think what's interesting and what I'd really like you to do for our audience is tell everybody what exactly is people-centric, and then we can get into some of the work that you've been doing.
Yeah, so people-centric, it probably helps to tell a little bit of the short version of the story. Is I'm a recovering engineer, spent 10 years in Fortune 500 companies doing engineering work. Mm-hmm. And what I got really interested was how some teams work and some teams don't. Like you'll see one location just absolutely kill it and others would be terrible and people would fight and it'd have bad cultures. So I got really interested on the science of how people work, which is what engineers do, is they study science and then they figure out how to apply that science. Mm-hmm. And I realized that while the science of how people work is really well known, the engineering was missing. So People-Centric is a company that I started and we've been around for a long time, over a decade now. And we have worked across the country with organizations helping them to apply the science of how people work. So to implement systems that help support a culture where people feel empowered, but they're also aligned together as organizations.
Now, Don, I probably have shared with you before, but a dear engineering friend of mine told me one time a story about engineers. He said, how do you tell an introverted engineer from an extroverted engineer? And of course, the extroverted engineer looks at your shoes when he talks to you.
That's right.
You have to get up in front of people. You're not your ordinary engineer.
No, and I never have been. I think that's I'm actually, the truth be told, and if anyone who's worked with me in the past probably knows this, is I'm not a talented engineer from an engineering perspective. There's engineers I know that can sit down and design amazing, equipment and know processes and things like that. And I can do some of that, but a lot of the times I found my role was communicating and bringing teams together and gaining alignment and empowerment. So I think that's always been within me. But plus this cool exterior that I put out sometimes fools people into not thinking that I'm an engineer.
My guest you're hearing and seeing today on Around the Ozarks Spotlight is Don Harkey. Don, living here in Southwest Missouri now, but not necessarily from here. He's the CEO of People-Centric, which is a company that'll travel to your organization and do a little research. Now, Don, it wasn't that many years ago you came to my organization and uncovered a lot of things, some that I think we kind of knew, but the difference being when you come in and you interview people, they seem to open up to you or open up to your people and tell them things that maybe you don't see on the surface.
Yeah, it's kind of funny, Scott, because sometimes people are concerned, like, when are they not going to tell you something? Or what if they don't say the things that they're really thinking? And our team kind of chuckles at that because I think people are chomping at the bit to get out the things that they see on a day-to-day basis and share. Mm-hmm. We even had one company that we worked with where the manager told the employees what to tell us. The manager said they had one manager internally and briefed everybody before we came and said, make sure you just tell them these things. Here's your talking points and make sure you do all that. Well, how do I know that, Scott? Because not just one person on the team told me that that's what happened. Sure. Everyone on the team shared. Yeah. Did you know that before our meeting, our manager briefed us and told us to tell you these talking points and be able to put this out? So let me get these talking points out and then I can tell you what's really going on. So it's fascinating. And I think a lot of times employees just want a place to be able to go that's safe to be able to share their concerns, not because they want to hurt the company or the manager that they work for, but really because they just want their day-to-day work to be better.
Don, I think, after 40 some years in business, almost 50 years in business, from my perspective, and certainly one in management, I've known a lot of managers over the years that are terrified to find out what people think. And if it doesn't start at the top, and when I say top, the very top of an organization, I'm not sure you're ever going to get to the heart of the problems.
Yeah, that's right. And if you're afraid, usually the things in business that you're afraid of are probably your best opportunities. If you're afraid of looking at your financials, that's probably an opportunity. If you're afraid of conversations, that's probably your best opportunity. If you're afraid of what your people are going to say, If somebody from the outside talks to them, that's
Mhm.
probably one of your best opportunities. What I like to tell managers who are a little bit afraid of that is to say they're already talking about it. They're already telling that story. This just
Mhm.
puts it in front of you and allows you to become a part of that narrative, which is, I think, is really important.
Now, we just came through 2 years of a pandemic, treated a little differently in Missouri, in this part of the country, but you don't have to go very far from here where it was treated even crazier.
Yeah.
And crazy from the standpoint of, we sent everybody home for good reason. Some companies invited people back, some companies are afraid to invite people back. From your perspective and working with different size companies, now that it's 2 years later, almost 3 years later, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's done a lot to accelerate how we think about work. So for one thing, from the employer's standpoint, we work with one employer who said, "Hey, if we shut down," and this was second week of March, and I think all of us can put ourselves there in 2020 of like, "Oh my gosh, what's about to happen here?"
Hmm.
As we were sent home, we had one client of ours that the owner called me and said, "I guess we're just done." Like as a company, how are my people going to work remotely? They're just going to mess around. They're not going to be productive. They're not going to do the things they need to do. And he was just really worried that they were going to be so unproductive that they were going to go out of business. And he actually found that when the people split up and worked in their line of business, it actually made them more efficient.
Hmm.
They actually got stuff done a little bit quicker than they were doing before, at least for a while. And it kind of shifted his management philosophy and how people work. You don't have to stand by somebody and just count hours to measure productivity. So I think it shifted that paradigm for some managers. For the employees, I think it shifted their paradigm on what they expect from a workplace.
Hmm.
Where there's two things that happened at the same time. There was a pandemic, but there was also a sandsdemic, and the sandsdemic is ongoing. And the sandsdemic means we don't have enough workers to fill jobs today. And that's a trend because boomers are retiring at a very high rate, and they will continue to retire through 2030.
Hmm.
So that shortage, I think, is created for employees. The power has shifted. It's okay. I worked from home and I really enjoyed it, or I worked from home and I didn't enjoy it. That gave me
Sure.
insights on how I like to work. I like how my employer treated me in the situation, so I'm going to be very loyal to them. I don't like the way my employer treated, so I can go find something different.
What about that chasm? What is it? Chasm? It's chasm.
You can say it either way. From
Okay, I'll say
Missouri,
it either way.
either
I've
way,
lived in
either
different
way.
parts of the country, so the chasm uh, that's developed between boomer work ethic, or what boomers see as a work ethic, and I'll pick on millennials a little bit because they're easy to pick on. Gen X is somewhere in between, but millennials kind of came out of this thing, or even in the middle of it, deciding that maybe work isn't the whole thing. Yet a lot of us boomers scratched our head and said, "Well, then how do you pay the bills?" So, have you seen that now that you're going into companies? This whole thing about working 4 days, or maybe working a day or two from home, or maybe working 4 or 5 hours a day as opposed to 8 hours a day. I mean, give me your thoughts on that, or what are you finding out there in different companies as far as they're trying to deal with this?
Yeah, well, it's really the first time in our history where we have four generations all working together in the workforce at the same time. You mentioned the baby boomers, you have Gen Xers, you have millennials, and now we have Gen Zs are the younger generation coming in. And right now, a lot of times they're called millennials because I think the boomers are used to just calling young people millennials, but it's a
Everything's
different
a
generation
millennial.
that's coming in.
Right.
That's right. Yeah, and Gen Z actually, like one of their characteristics is that they have a very high work ethic. They actually work a lot. They're a little bit more like boomers in that standpoint. Is they a
Hmm.
lot of times the gig economy is really alive and well. So yeah, they like the idea of I'm going to put in 8 hours of work or 7 hours of work maybe, and then I'll put in another 3 hours in this other job, and I'll do some freelance stuff over here. So it is a lot different. When we talk to boomers who are trying to manage millennials and Gen Zs and they complain about the ethics of the generation,
Hmm.
what we try to say is you can complain about that, but the solution to that is to wait that generation out, which is not really something that boomers can do. And it's not a very good strategy anyway. So we tried to coach to say, how can you manage and relate better to that generation? And which, the work-life balance idea, it's a pretty good idea. And I
Hmm.
don't meet very many boomers who really disagree with that ultimately at the end of the day. I know a lot of boomers who think it's a bad idea to text during an interview, which I also agree with. So yes,
God.
there's a line there in terms of
Right.
what is right and what is wrong in terms of acceptable in the workplace. But I just think looking at it as a generational fault, that's something that's going to happen with every generation. The next generation that comes in, whatever we decide to name that, is going to have its flaws, and it's probably going to drive the Gen X people crazy. So I think we have to learn to adapt to each other and to get aligned in the workplace. And I think that then you can overcome those generational differences, and they actually become a strength then as a group.
My guest today on Around the Ozark Spotlight is Don Harkey. Don is the CEO of Centric, a local company that travels all across the country. Let's talk about that. Don, you don't work simply with companies here in Southwest Missouri. You reach out pretty far. And I suppose in the age of Zoom, are you reaching across the oceans as well?
We're not overseas yet, but we do work all the way across. We had clients in Alaska and California and all the way up to New York and Connecticut and Minnesota and Texas. So we've pretty much just spanned the U.S. We get our miles in. I don't like to flout my flight status, but it's pretty high. It's pretty good. I get pretty good seats when I fly. But yeah, you're right. The pandemic did shift, and it accelerated the technology use, just like we're doing now.
Sure.
Where it's become more of the norm than the exception. So it does allow us to be able to work pretty closely with companies and establish close relationships. There's a company I've worked with for 3 years, and I've never been on site with them. And I know all of their employees, and we've got a great relationship. I never thought that would have been, if you'd asked me that 5 years ago, I'd say that can't be possible. But today it's possible, and people are getting used to it.
It's interesting. My son's a sales trainer, and his company does a lot of work in and around Michigan and the Detroit metro area. His largest client now is in Germany. So things changed a lot.
Well, it's a good example because I've met your son Eric at conferences before, and we've maintained a connection from afar from that. And I don't think I've been in a room with him for more than a few hours, in our lives. But it's you can make those relationships and build that network using this media, which is pretty cool.
Well, let's talk about that for a minute, because in a business like I'm in broadcasting, it's a lot of creativity. You get people in a room; they can be very creative. You get people on a Zoom screen, not so much. It's almost like doing when you do field work in a room and you have people together and you're asking questions. It always seems like one or two people will dominate that conversation, as opposed to kind of the free form that you'll get when people are in person. Are you seeing that a little bit?
Yeah, so we've had to create some almost Zoom rules, and we have the ones that are out loud and the ones that are kind of quiet behind the scenes. The ones that are out loud is like, turn your cameras on. So like if we're on, we've been to companies before where nobody turns their cameras on, and then you're just talking to the ether. And if you suddenly turn on everybody's camera, you would see them all doing other things while they're talking. So yeah, that creativity gets lost. Also, if somebody has to be designated to be leading the meeting, so you have to call on people sometimes, like, okay, hey, it looks like you had a thought. So like when I'm leading a Zoom meeting, I've got everybody's faces up on the screen. And if I see somebody looks like they've had a thought, I have to pay attention to that. And I have to say, hey, Scott, okay, Scott, looks like you just had a thought. What are you thinking? What's your input on this? And call people out. On the flip side of that, it gives facilitators a tool that we've never had before, is we have a mute button. And this is a secret if we can just keep this between us and all of your listeners, but I have used that mute button before in a meeting where it's like, oh, suddenly you're on mute. People don't always realize that the person who controls the Zoom call can actually make that kind of thing happen. So
as long as you do it on Zoom calls and not at home, Don, I don't think that's going to play out well.
We have not invented that technology.
No, I've tried that a few times in my marriage, and boy, I'll tell you what, that hasn't worked very well.
It's probably a bad idea.
It's a horrible idea, actually. Quickly before we go to break, give people a little bit of more backstory on you. What makes someone like you able to do this with an engineering background?
Yeah, well, I think engineering is problem solving, right? And so it's problem solving that always involves people, and it also involves technology. So I think that allowed me to focus on the people side, but still apply engineering principles to it. And I think we take a very systems approach. The secret to improving your culture as an organization is not to work on culture. There's too many companies that hang signs up and try to be motivational about it and do that kind of thing. That really doesn't have a long-term impact on culture. What really has a long-term impact on culture is systems that impact culture. So
Mhm.
it's how you hire, it's how you onboard, it's how you have meetings, it's how you train your managers, it's how you improve processes, it's how you plan things strategically. Those systems create engagement, they create empowerment, and they create alignment.
Let's come back and talk a little bit more about that after the break. We'll be back in a moment with more on Around the Ozarks Spotlight. I'm your host, Scott Meier.
Hey, everybody, it's Ethan and Sarah Forhetz from your favorite podcast, Around the Ozarks in 5. I'm sure you've been wondering, how can I get even more amazing stories, events, and witty banter to start my day?
Well, look no further. Here we are. Sign up for our daily newsletter. You'll have what's going on around the Ozarks right at your fingertips each weekday morning.
Yeah, just go to aroundtheozarks.com, click on the newsletter tab to sign up.
Thanks for listening to Around the Ozarks in 5. We hope to see you in your inbox soon.
And welcome back to the second half of today's Around the Ozarks Spotlight. I'm your host, Scott Meier. With me today is the CEO. Are you also president, Don, or CEO? Or do you just hanging out there?
I was introduced yesterday, and they said CEO and president, and I was like, "Wow, that's pretty cool."
That's a lot of stuff.
CEO. When you own your business, you get to give yourself your own title. So,
yeah, and your own raises,
and your own
pay cuts. Anyhow, my guest today is Don Harkey. Don, some of you may know because Don's been a resident here in the Springfield area for quite some time. But Don owns and purchased a company called Centric. You initially helped start the company, did you not?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, I started I had my own consulting firm when I first jumped out that had a different name back in 2007. And then had a partner for a little while, and we were working together on several clients. Then we merged the companies together to create Centric, and then I bought him out in 2018.
And it's been going well.
It has been going really well. Yeah, I think we've been growing. We're still growing. We're hiring right now, which is exciting. So if anybody's looking for anything, they can come to our website and check out, see what positions are open. But yeah, there's a big demand for what we're doing because I think there's a shortage in the workforce, and companies are competing for labor. And the way you do that is you have a culture that people want to work at.
Now, tell me if I'm wrong, but I had somebody ask me the other day, they were looking for an opportunity. And I said, are you looking for a job or a career? Because I've always thought that there's a difference between getting a job and or working towards a career. And, they were scratching their head a little bit. And I said, well, the reason I asked the question is it's a job. It's a tight job market with respect to there are a lot of jobs out there, but they're always looking for better people. And if you can get in front of people and have a conversation with them and get inside their heads a little bit, not just simply tell them what you do, but get inside their heads. What are they all about? Maybe they'll find a place for you. Is that still fair even in a job market like we have now?
Yeah, I like that a lot. And it's still very true that if you approach a job and so if I'm trying to apply for a job with you, Scott, and I'm like, here, what can you do for me? And I approach it that way, that puts a wall between us. Like we're both fighting each other. But if I come into an interview and I start asking you questions about what is it that you're looking for? What kind of a great candidate do you need? That suddenly opens up and wow, this person's looking for a long-term relationship here, which I think you're referring to as a career. It doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to be committed to each other for life from that conversation, but I just think even if it was a short-term engagement and I'm still interested in what it is that you need, I think that's how humans work. I mean, that's a very basic communication thing is if I'm interested, I know what I need already. So if I spend all my time telling you what I need, then I'm not learning the other half of the equation. So we've got to be able to communicate effectively with each other.
Now, the other day I read a quote. It was a goal without a plan. And in this case, a plan that you put in place and manage is simply a fantasy. Through my career, I've seen that. And it's interesting. It doesn't have to be necessarily on site. It can be part of a company where they have that kind of almost a mission statement. I think this year we need to do X. There's absolutely no plan to get to X. And then at the end of the day, everybody gets beat up because we didn't get to X. What are your thoughts about that in the workplace?
That has a tremendous impact on how people feel about work, because fundamentally what we're motivated by is, yes, the paycheck gets us to work, gets us out of bed and gets us rolling in. But at the end of the day, if you want to see really high performance, we're motivated on why we work, why we do the things that we do and what kind of impact that has. there are too many employees out there that don't understand financials of a business and how they impact the financials on a day-to-day. So they don't understand how the decisions they make impact the company. There's too many employees out there that don't understand what the goals are, or what the strategy is, or what the mission is, or what the company stands for when they work. And then you're just going to work every day and you're just doing a job. And I think that creates disengagement or even toxicity, which creates reduced productivity, which has a big impact on, first of all, the lives of the people, but also the companies that they work for.
When you're out prospecting for new companies, I'm assuming you have prospectors on your staff, and I can't imagine you're not a prospector yourself. But who do you talk to? Do you talk to mid-level management? Do you always talk to the CEO, or do you talk to the underlings, if you will, the folks in the field doing the heavy lifting?
So we do a lot of conferences. So I'm a keynote speaker. Matt Griswold on our team is a popular keynote speaker. Both of us just did a national conference down in Orlando for Medical Group Management Association. And so a lot of times when we speak at those, what we find is that the mid-level employees especially are the ones that come to us and say, our company absolutely needs you. We need help in the things. And what they're saying is like, I used to have this job as an employee, and I was really good at that job. And one day management came and tapped me on the shoulder and said, we're going to put you into a completely different job of leading and motivating people, but we're not going to give you any additional training on how to do that. And I have made lots of mistakes, and I'm very frustrated with my people, and I'm frustrated with the managers above me and the executives, and I don't have the direction. I'm stuck, and it's a tough place to be. So a lot of times we get a lot of feedback from that, and then they will open the doors to the executives, who are, by the way, secretly and longer term frustrated because they came up the exact same way and having to lead this company. And how do I lead this? And how do I manage these managers? And all those different things. So that's kind of the process for how that works.
Typically, when you have a customer, I would guess it's a partnership. It's a real feeling of partnership. How long does that partnership last? Do they have you come in 6 months and you fix it, or is it an ongoing checkup from the neck up, every few months or whatever?
Yeah, that's a great question. So a lot of times, Scott, we'll start with a project that might take, a month or 2 months or 3 months, something that's, we'll do a strategic planning session, or we'll do a communication styles workshop, or some kind of management training or something or like your company did. We did an assessment, interviews, trying to find out what's going on the inside to give a list of opportunities to work on. That's kind of the project aspect, but you're right. To be able to make a cultural change inside the company, it takes a longer term relationship. And that's where we get into a partnership with the companies we work for. And a lot of the companies we've worked for many years, 5, 7, 8, 9, 10 years, relationships with these companies, not because they're badly broken, but because they see us. You have an accountant to help you with your financials. You probably have attorneys that help you with your legal stuff. How big an issue are your people stuff? Why would you not have a company that's riding along with you to help you, to coach employees when they need some help on things, to provide some training, to implement systems that develop a strong culture? And I think companies are starting to see that, which is why our retention is really pretty high. And so once we start working with companies, because they see that value of what we can add. And it's not that we're doing it, it's we're helping your people to get better, which is what's really rewarding from our end.
Have you ever had a chance to break bread with Jack Stack?
Absolutely. Yeah. Jack's a friend. We're partners with Great Game of Business, actually. That has been Jack's been a cool, I've got to work with him on a couple nonprofit boards through things. I love the way he thinks about things. And I think he's become a fan of ours as well. That's been a great partnership, and adding that financial tool to our tool bag for systems has been really powerful.
Well, it's quite a parallel. The Great Game of Business parallels a lot of what People-Centric does, yet People-Centric, I think, probably asks a lot more questions. Great Game of Business sometimes is a little top-down. It seems like, here's our plan, here's how we want everybody to be part of it, and this is the result on the other end. Whereas I think sometimes with People-Centric, you really do pull apart what are people thinking, and how do we put that into a plan? Can we put it in a plan and then make it part of our everyday work? I'll share quickly, Don. One of the things that we did that followed our working with your company, we were rolling out something new. It was a sales system and a digital sales system. And in my previous company, they had rolled it out top down. If you didn't get on board, get out. That was the way the whole thing was done. And that was horrendous, as you could imagine. Big company, 3,000 people, typical. And in this case, we sat after having gone through what we'd learned with People Centric and said, there's got to be another way to roll this out. We still want to do it, but we want buy-in. And we really created 2 teams. The teams took the responsibility of rolling it out to their teams, and they weren't managers. They were selected by the staff, and great success. But the other part of that worked really well for us was I was all bought in too as the general manager, and that goes back to my point about people at the top. If the top doesn't hear it, doesn't feel it, and doesn't have the skin to be able to take on the thick skin to take on criticism, because there is criticism when you ask the folks what's going on in their minds. Typically, I'm not sure it ever works.
Yeah, you have to have blood flow both directions, and Great Game is a good system like that. It's not really a top-down system. I mean, the financials have to start from the top because that's where the financials live. But really, when the game is successfully implemented, you see frontline employees understanding things and asking questions. And I've gotten to sit at SRC, that's the parent company for Great Game of Business.
Sure.
I've sat in the cafeteria at SRC Heavy Duty before, where they have all their scorecards around the cafeteria, and listen to groups of welders talking about how their efficiency dropped by 3% over the last week, and what can they do to improve that. I mean, that's an executive's dream, is to make that connection.
Absolutely.
As Jack would say, people own what they help to create. So like what you've zeroed in on is so many managers think that their job is to solve problems for their employees. And I think that is one of the worst ways to look at your position. Really, your job is to help other people learn how to solve problems for the company. Because if they do that, then they will own the solutions to those problems. And the examples that you just laid out, you did freedom within a framework. You created the framework and said, we're heading this direction, but how we head in this direction, I want to give you all some autonomy to make some decisions within that. And so then when they stepped into that, then they got to choose that direction. And I mean, it's amazing what you can do with that.
Oh, and they did a great job. The buy-in was complete. It really and truly was.
Yeah, we just did it with a hospital who was, and this is kind of the third rail of consulting. They wanted to talk about their paychecks. How much can we get paid? Like, we want to make more money. And a lot of times managers try to explain to their employees why they can't make more money. You can't we don't pay you more because of this, this, and this, and this. What we encourage is a different approach altogether, and say, we would like to pay you more too. This is good news. We're on the exact same page. I'm glad you want to make more money. I want to pay you more money. Let's talk about how we can do that. And we worked with a hospital that we had some frontline employees that they wanted to understand how they set pay levels. And so the HR team let them in and said, here's the process that we follow. And by the way, we're open if you have suggestions for it. It just has to fiscally work for the hospital. And they looked at the process and ended up saying, you know what, actually, this is a pretty darn good process. And we're really impressed and furthermore proud that the hospital dives into it so much. And then they went back and evangelized that with some of their frontline staff. And it just helped. They didn't have to go out and give pay raises to everybody. They just felt ownership in the process to show how that's worked.
What's the difference between working with a sales-based organization and a group of medical people, as far as People Centric, how you work with one or the other?
Well, sales-based organizations, people are, I say that a lot of people aren't fundamentally motivated by money. The exception may be our salespeople, who are really, I don't think, are motivated by the money itself, but by the act of getting the money. So I think it's a specific type of person that is really good at sales. They like to set the goals. They like to see the direction. They like to see the progress. They like to keep score, and they like to celebrate when they win. In terms of things. Now, those are fairly universal traits, but for salespeople, it really is dialed up, and it really is about the score. So I think it's just like any organization. You have to think about how your people are motivated, what they get excited about, and then if they take ownership. But I mean, still the things we've just talked about apply. They got to know the score to know whether they're winning or not. Just met with a company yesterday, and they were talking about a salesperson that was coming in. And I said, the most important thing you're going to do for that salesperson is show them where they are. They have an expectation for what they're supposed to sell. And you need to keep going back and have weekly conversations, if not daily conversations, on here's what we did. What are you going to do tomorrow? Here's what we did. What are you going to do tomorrow? Here's what we did. What are you going to do tomorrow? And that helps the person to get engaged with that. So I think there's some nuances to it, but I don't think they're two different animals, if that makes sense.
Don Harkey, my guest on Around the Ozark Spotlight. Don, CEO of People Centric. In the last minute, Don, that we have left, anybody hearing today's show that says, that could work in my organization, how do they get a hold of you?
So they can check out, we've got a great website at peoplecentric.com. They can reach out to me, Don Harkey. If you Google me, you'll find me. I'm supposed to be found. As you said, I'm in development, so you can find that. But you can also email me at donharkey@peoplecentric.com.
And that's the best way to get the value of getting to know you and your staff, which, by the way, is an amazing staff. And you said there's some opportunities right now as well.
Yeah, we're going to be expanding. We do have an amazing team, Scott. I appreciate that a lot. We're really careful about who we bring onto our team. We're picky about that. We're looking for a specific set of skills. But if it's something that you think you'd be passionate about and you're listening to this, I encourage you to explore it.
I want to thank my guest, Don Harkey, today on Around the Ozarks Spotlight. Also, my producers, because they're great, Taylor Worley and Jay Stevens, as well as all of you for joining us. If you happen to miss all or part of today's program, you can always find it in its entirety on the MidwestFamilySpringfield.com website, the AroundTheOzarks.com site, or even our new app for ATO, which can be found in the Apple App Store or Android apps. You can hear and view today's show as well as all the earlier shows this year and last. I'm your host, Scott Meier. See, I had to read that from a piece of paper. I'm your host, Scott Meier. Remember, every day's a gift. Enjoy life. Thanks again, Don.
Thanks, Scott.